I found out my husband got my younger sister pregnant. Moments later, his text arrived. She needs me. I'm moving in with her. Oh, and I drained our joint account. Ha ha. I took a deep breath and replied with a single word. Congratulations. Hours later, when his world collapsed, he finally understood. I had already made my move. Before we continue, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about where you are watching from. Let's go back to where it all began. I'll never forget the day my world came crashing down. It was a chilly October evening, and I had just returned from a long day at the office. As I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed with a new message. Expecting it to be a reminder of the dinner plans my husband, Caleb, and I had later that evening, I smiled and opened the message. But it wasn't what I expected. Not at all. The message was from Caleb, but it wasn't about dinner. My heart sank as I read the words that would change everything. I'm sorry, Grace. I've moved out. I'm with Eva now, and she's pregnant. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat, the phone nearly slipping through my trembling hands. How could this be? Eva, my younger sister. How could they do this to me? I sank to the floor, my back against the fridge, as tears began to stream down my face. The betrayal was too deep, too raw to comprehend. I had loved Caleb with all my heart, and Eva, she was my sister, my confidant. The room spun around me as I tried to process the shock. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to compose myself enough to check our bank app. True to his word, our joint account was nearly empty. Caleb had cleaned us out. But amidst the whirlwind of emotions, a small part of me felt relieved. I had suspected something was off for months. His late nights, the whispered phone calls, he thought I didn't notice. I had prepared in my own way. With a heavy heart, I called my lawyer. The next steps were a blur, freezing our accounts, changing the locks, filing for divorce. It was mechanical, each action a shield to protect what was left of my broken heart. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but replay the years of our marriage in my mind. The signs had been there, subtly woven through our daily lives. The late returns from work, the sudden weekend trips he needed for clearing his head, the frequent mentions of Eva and how she was doing with her new job. It all made sense now, a cruel puzzle finally coming together. But there was a part of me that was angry, not just at Caleb or Eva, but at myself for not seeing it sooner, for allowing myself to trust so completely. Yet, I knew this was only the beginning of a long journey of healing and reclaiming my life from the shards of this betrayal. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this define me. I would move forward, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Caleb and Eva had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. As the early morning light streamed through the blinds, casting shadows across the room, my mind raced back to the days leading up to Caleb's devastating revelation. The signs of his betrayal, subtle and insidious, had been there, but I had chosen to overlook them, clinging to the belief in the man I thought I knew. One evening, a few months ago, Caleb had come home later than usual, his shirt misbuttoned and his explanations hurried. He brushed off my concerns with a laugh, assuring me it was just a hectic day at work. But then there were the phone calls, always stepping out of the room with a furtive glance over his shoulder, and the messages that he quickly swiped away whenever I approached. I remember one particular night when I woke up to find his side of the bed empty. The soft glow of the living room light guided me to find him hunched over his phone, his expression tense. He jumped when he saw me, shoving the phone in his pocket as he muttered about not being able to sleep. I had believed him, or at least I had tried to. Then there were the bank statements, random charges for expensive jewelry and weekend getaways that he dismissed as surprises for our upcoming anniversary. I wanted to believe him so badly that I silenced the nagging voice in my head, telling me something was off. But perhaps the most damning evidence was his newfound interest in Eva's life. He asked about her incessantly, how she was doing, if she needed any help settling into her new apartment, what her plans were. I thought it was brotherly concern. After all, Eva had always been like a sister to him too. I was so engrossed in my own work and life that I mistook his attention for familial affection. Each memory, each overlooked sign now came back with painful clarity, stitching together the narrative of betrayal that had unfolded right under my nose. The late nights weren't just late nights. They were clandestine meetings. The check-ins on Eva were not out of concern, but out of a shared secret that excluded me, their bond forged in deception. But amidst this turmoil, I found a strange sense of empowerment. Knowing that I had already taken steps to protect myself financially gave me a small, bitter comfort. I had moved my personal savings into a separate account a month ago, a decision driven by a gut feeling that something wasn't right. This foresight left only a minimal amount in our joint account, enough to pay the bills, but not enough for Caleb to squander away. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of what I once believed was a happy marriage, I realized that while I couldn't go back and confront each overlooked sign, I could use them to rebuild stronger than before. It was a harsh lesson in trust and intuition, one that would undoubtedly shape my path forward. As I navigated the early days of separation, fortified by the bitter lessons of betrayal, I began to piece together a strategy that was both defensive and assertive. The day I discovered the truth about Caleb and Eva was devastating, yet it ignited a spark of resilience within me. I was determined not to be the victim of their selfishness. The memory of moving my personal savings felt like the first smart play in a game I never wanted to participate in. It was an act spurred by intuition, a protective measure against the unknown. That decision now stood as a testament to my foresight, a shield that safeguarded my financial stability when everything else was in turmoil. In those first few weeks, my actions were calculated and methodical. I contacted my bank to discuss the best ways to secure my assets further. They advised me on restructuring my investment portfolio and setting up new accounts solely under my name. I also met with a financial advisor who helped me devise a plan to not only secure my current assets, but also grow them. This proactive approach was empowering, transforming my financial landscape into one where I controlled every aspect. I pored over every financial document and statement from the past year, hunting for any discrepancies. Each discovery of a hidden expense or a secret withdrawal added fuel to my resolve. I meticulously documented everything, preparing for the legal battles that lay ahead. My lawyer was a steadfast ally, guiding me through the complexities of financial, separation, and divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, I bolstered my personal security by changing all my passwords and securing my digital life. I contacted credit bureaus to ensure there would be no unauthorized attempts to leverage my credit history. It was a full-scale lockdown, a fortress built not from bricks, but from prudence and foresight. At nights, when the weight of loneliness crept in, I turned to rebuilding my personal budget. I outlined a new financial plan that reflected my newfound single status, but also my ambition to emerge from this crisis more robust than ever. This included cutting unnecessary expenses, increasing my savings rate, and investing in areas that promised long-term growth. One evening, as I reviewed my revised budget, I realized how much financial autonomy I had regained. There was a profound sense of achievement in knowing that I had taken smart steps to secure my future. These were not just financial decisions. They were declarations of my independence and resilience. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by papers and plans, a small smile played on my lips. The road ahead would be challenging, But I was no longer the same woman who had naively trusted Caleb. I was smarter, tougher, and equipped with the financial acumen to protect myself and thrive. With my financial affairs now securely under my control, I turned to severing all remaining ties with Caleb. The empowerment I felt from taking control of my finances was palpable, and it fueled my resolve to cut him out of my life completely. It was time to reclaim my space, both physically and emotionally. I began with the house, the home I had once shared with Caleb, filled with memories, both sweet and sour. It was legally mine, bought with my inheritance before we married, which gave me the legal footing I needed. One brisk morning, I called the locksmith. As the locks clicked into place, symbolically shutting Caleb out, I felt a chapter closing. I sent him an email later that day, informing him of the change. His response was a mix of anger and disbelief, but I was unmoved. My home was once again my sanctuary. Next, I contacted our service providers to remove his access to our accounts, everything from streaming services to our grocery delivery app. It might have seemed petty to some, but for me, it was a necessary purge, a cleansing of my life from his lingering presence. Each disconnection was a step towards independence, a declaration that I was no longer bound to him or his choices. The toughest decision came when I decided to freeze our joint accounts. I knew this would catch him off guard, but it was essential to protect myself from further financial harm. I met with my bank manager, who helped me navigate the process with professionalism and empathy. The accounts were frozen effectively, barring him from any further access. This action sent a clear message. His financial hold over me was gone. As these changes took effect, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The life I had known with Caleb was disintegrating, each action undoing the ties that had bound us. But with each step, I felt lighter, freer from the web of deceit that had ensnared me. I also filed for divorce. Sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the papers, felt surreal. It was a mix of formal procedure and profound emotional upheaval. But as I placed my signature on each document, I felt a growing sense of solidity and purpose. I was not just ending a marriage. I was affirming my right to a future free from betrayal. The day I filed the divorce papers, I also changed my will and all emergency contacts. Caleb was erased from every facet of my life, where he once held significance. It was a thorough and complete severance. That night, I sat in the quiet of my now solely owned living room, the silence profound yet comforting. The finality of my actions reverberated through the empty spaces, filling them with a sense of possibility. I was alone, yes, but I was also whole, untouched by Caleb's deceit. I had taken back my life, one lock, one signature, one frozen account at a time. The quiet of my reclaimed sanctuary was abruptly shattered one evening when Eva's name flashed across my phone screen. My heart skipped a beat, a cocktail of emotions. Swirling through me, surprise, anger, a reluctant curiosity. I hesitated, but something inside urged me to answer. I needed to face her, to hear what she had to say. "Hello, Grace," came her trembling voice, a stark contrast to the confidence she once radiated. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I was so wrong, and I understand if you can't forgive me, but I needed to apologize. Her words, soaked in regret and fear, pierced the calm I had fought so hard to establish. Yet, my voice was steady as I responded, "Ava, you and Caleb made your choices. You both decided to betray me, and now you must live with those consequences." She sobbed over the line, pleading for some semblance of forgiveness, a chance to explain herself. "I thought he loved me, Grace. He promised he would take care of us. I was so foolish." Listening to her, I felt a twinge of pity. Not enough to undo the betrayal, but enough to acknowledge her remorse. "Ava, you were my sister, not just by blood, but in all the ways that mattered. You chose him, and now you must face this without my help." There was silence, a heavy, burdensome pause that seemed to stretch endlessly. Finally, she whispered, "I understand. I'm truly sorry, Grace." And with that, the line went dead. After the call, I sat back. The weight of the conversation settling around me. Eva's plea for forgiveness had reopened old wounds, yet it also reaffirmed my resolve. I had handled the situation with the dignity and firmness it warranted. She and Caleb had woven this tangled web of deceit, and as much as it pained me, they had to untangle it themselves. In the days that followed, Ava's words echoed in my mind. Despite the chaos she had helped unleash, her regret seemed genuine. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless, knowing that the gravity of their actions had finally dawned on them. This incident marked a pivotal moment in my journey of healing. It underscored the necessity of boundaries and the importance of standing firm in one's convictions, no matter how difficult the confrontation might be. It was a testament to my growth, my ability to handle betrayal with grace, and to prioritize my well-being over misplaced familial obligations. As I moved forward, the echo of Eva's plea became a reminder of the strength I had garnered through these trials. I had not just survived, I had evolved. And with each passing day, my resolve to build a future unfettered by the past grew stronger. As the weeks rolled by, the fallout from my firm stance became increasingly apparent. Caleb, ever the schemer, had harbored plans to move back into my home under the guise of supporting Eva and their unborn child. His audacity knew no bounds, but he was in for a rude awakening. One crisp morning, I received an unexpected visit from Caleb. He stood on my doorstep, his face a mixture of frustration and desperation. "Grace, we need to talk," he said, his voice edged with a plea. "I need to come back. Eva needs me, and I want to be there for my child." I looked him squarely in the eyes, my resolve as solid as the door that stood between us. "Caleb, you have no legal claim to this house, and you lost the right to ask anything of me the moment you decided to betray our vows. Your plans are not my concern. You need to leave." He was taken aback, his plan crumbling before his eyes. "But Grace, where am I supposed to go? You can't just turn your back on me. We were a family." "We were," I affirmed, "but you chose a different path. Now, you must face the consequences of those choices." Caleb's face contorted with anger, a stark reminder of the man he had become. He had expected me to buckle, to accept him back out of some misplaced sense of duty or forgiveness. But I stood firm, and with each word, I reinforced the boundaries I had painstakingly erected. Defeated, he turned away, his shoulders slumped as he walked back to the car where Eva sat waiting. In that moment, I realized the full extent of his miscalculation. He had underestimated my strength and resolve, thinking he could manipulate his way back into a life he had forfeited. In the days that followed, I heard through mutual friends that Caleb's situation had deteriorated. His credit cards were maxed out, and with the joint accounts frozen, he had little financial recourse. He and Eva were forced to live off the meager savings she had, and the reality of their situation began to sink in. Caleb's plan to rely on the security and comfort of the life we had built together had backfired spectacularly. Instead of returning to a home filled with love and forgiveness, he found himself locked out, both literally and figuratively. It was a harsh lesson in accountability and the consequences of deceit. This chapter in my life, while painful, was also profoundly empowering. Watching Caleb's plans disintegrate not only reaffirmed my decision to protect my sanctuary, but also highlighted my growth. I was no longer the woman who could be swayed by empty promises or manipulative pleas. I was the architect of my own future, building a life on a foundation of integrity and self-respect. It didn't take long for Caleb's life to unravel. His reckless decisions had finally caught up with him, and the safety net he had counted on, my home, my finances, my patience, was gone. Now, reality was setting in like a storm he never saw coming. At first, he tried to put on a brave front, pretending he had everything under control. But without access to my assets, the weight of his financial instability grew heavier by the day. He had maxed out his credit cards, thinking he could ride out the rough patch until he found a way to manipulate his way back in. But the bills piled up faster than his excuses. One by one, his lifelines started to snap. The expensive dinners, impulsive shopping sprees, and lavish hotel stays that he had once effortlessly funded with our joint account were now beyond his reach. His bank rejected his withdrawal attempts. His cards were declined in public places, and his ego took a hit every time he was forced to come up with a new lie about why he couldn't pay. Then came the debt collectors. With his accounts frozen and no stable income, the calls started rolling in, relentless, demanding, unforgiving. His name, once synonymous with confidence and charm, was now attached to overdue payments and final warnings. He had spent years living comfortably, leaning on me. But now, there was no one left to bail him out. Eva, too, began to see the cracks in the fantasy he had sold her. She had envisioned a future with a man who would provide for her and their unborn child. But instead, she found herself tied to someone who had burned every bridge. Their once secret affair, so thrilling and full of reckless passion, had turned into a waking nightmare. The desperation in Caleb's voice grew more apparent. Each time he called me, he went from rage-filled demands to feeble attempts at reasoning, his pride slowly crumbling under the weight of his choices. "Grace, please, I just need a little help to get back on my feet," he pleaded one evening. But I had nothing left to give him. No money, no sympathy, no second chances. "Caleb, you made this mess. It's time you learned how to clean it up yourself," I said simply, hanging up before he could try another excuse. I won't lie. There was a part of me that felt a flicker of satisfaction seeing him face the consequences of his betrayal. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I knew that for the first time, he had to face the reality he had always avoided. There was no shortcut, no way out through manipulation. This was rock bottom, and he had brought it upon himself. While he spiraled into financial ruin, I flourished. My business thrived, my finances remained intact, and my peace was finally returning. I had severed every tie that once bound me to him, and now I could watch from a distance as the house of lies he had built came crashing down. And the best part? I didn't have to do anything. He had destroyed himself. Just when I thought I had seen the last of Caleb, life had one more scene left to play out. It was a cold evening, the kind where the wind howls through the trees like a whispering warning. I had just settled into my couch with a warm cup of tea when a loud, frantic knock echoed through the house. I knew before I even reached the door who it was. Taking a slow, steady breath, I walked toward it, each step measured, each heartbeat, reminding me of how far I'd come. When I pulled it open, there he stood. Caleb, the man who had once been my husband, now looking nothing like the charming figure I had once loved. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken with exhaustion, his face painted with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Grace," he exhaled, his breath visible in the night air. "Let me in." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe, unimpressed. Why would I do that? His jaw tightened. Because I have nowhere else to go. I studied him for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle between us. He had truly lost everything, his home, his money, his pride. And now, after all the betrayal, after draining our account and trying to manipulate his way back into my life, he had the audacity to ask for my help. I almost laughed. "You had a home," I said, voice steady. "You had a future. You had a wife who would have stood by your side through anything, but but you threw it all away for a cheap thrill and a bank account you could drain. Now, you expect me to save you?" His face twisted with frustration. "I made a mistake. I see that now. Grace, I just need time to figure things out." I shook my head. "You had time. And every time I gave you trust, you destroyed it. Now that door." I gestured to the threshold. "It's closed. Permanently." He raked a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "Eva kicked me out. I've got nothing." Grace, nothing. For a fleeting second, I saw the man I once knew, the one who had whispered dreams into my ear, who had promised forever. But then, just as quickly, I remembered the reality. The text message, the stolen money, the lies. My heart hardened. "Then, you'll have to learn how to rebuild from nothing," I said simply. "The way I did," he scoffed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You really think you're better than me now?" I gave him a long, measured look. "No, Caleb. I've always been better than the person you chose to become." He stood there for a few seconds longer, as if hoping I'd change my mind. When I didn't, when my silence made it clear that there was nothing left for him here, he let out a bitter laugh. "You're cold, Grace." I tilted my head, a small, knowing smile on my lips. "No, Caleb, I'm just done." And with that, I closed the door. This time, for good. Closing that door felt like the final punctuation mark in a story that had dragged on for too long. But for Caleb, it was just the beginning of a downward spiral he never saw coming. He had always been the man with a plan, the one who could talk his way out of anything, but life had a way of humbling even the smoothest of manipulators. With nowhere else to turn, he drifted from friend to friend, burning every last favor he had left. But word spreads fast when someone's life is in freefall. People who once admired him now saw him for what he was, a man who had built his world on lies, deception, and borrowed security. No one wanted to offer a hand to a man who had so willingly destroyed his own foundation. Eva, the woman he had risked everything for, had finally seen through his act. When the weight of their circumstances became unbearable, she made the inevitable choice. She kicked him out. With a baby on the way, she could no longer afford to support his delusions. She realized that if she didn't cut ties with him, she would drown alongside him. And so, there he was, broke, homeless, stripped of the illusion that he could always land on his feet. His once pristine suits were replaced by whatever he could, scrounged together. His credit cards were maxed out, his bank accounts empty, his options dwindling by the day. At first, he tried to put on a brave face, telling himself this was temporary, just a rough patch he would bounce back from. But then came the eviction notices from cheap motels, the nights spent sleeping in his car, until that too was repossessed. He walked the same streets where he once took me on dates, except now, he was looking for a cheap meal instead of a fine restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on him. For the first time in his life, Caleb had to face himself without the buffer of money, charm, or influence, and what he saw wasn't pretty. The world had moved on, indifferent to his plight. No one owed him anything, least of all me. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The divorce had freed me in ways I hadn't even realized I needed. My business flourished, my friendships deepened, and my future felt brighter than ever. I was building something real, something that couldn't be taken away by betrayal. Caleb had always assumed he could come back, that I'd be there waiting, ready to patch up his wounds. But he had miscalculated. He had underestimated not just my strength, but the finality of my resolve. He was alone. And for the first time in his life, there was no one left to save him. Eva had always been impulsive. She lived for the thrill of the moment, chasing excitement without thinking about the consequences. But reality has a way of catching up with people like her. And when it did, it hit her harder than she ever imagined. At first, she convinced herself that Caleb would find a way out of their mess. He had charmed his way through life before, so why would this time be any different? But as the weeks passed and his situation only worsened, the truth became unavoidable. He was a sinking ship, and she had willingly climbed aboard. The day she kicked him out was the day she finally saw him for who he was. He had promised her security, a future, a family built on something more than just stolen moments. But now, all he could offer was regret and empty words. He was broke, he was desperate, and worst of all, he was selfish. He had never truly loved her. She was just another reckless choice in a long line of bad decisions. Alone in her apartment, surrounded by unopened baby gifts and ultrasound pictures, Eva felt the weight of her choices suffocating her. She had destroyed her relationship with the one person who had always been in her corner, me. And for what? A man who had never been capable of loyalty? The regret was unbearable. She tried calling me again, but this time I didn't answer. She had already pleaded for forgiveness once, and I had made it clear that some betrayals cut too deep to mend. Still, she left a voicemail, her voice thick with emotion. Grace, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I need you to know that I was wrong. About everything. I ruined my life, and I ruined us. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say it. I'm sorry. I listened to her words, but they didn't have the power they once might have. I had spent too much time healing to let them undo the peace I had worked so hard to find. I felt for her, but sympathy wasn't enough to bridge the chasm between us. Eva had made her bed. Now, she had to lie in it. And as much as I wished things had been different, I knew that some lessons had to be learned the hard way. She had lost me, just as she had lost everything else. And that perhaps was the greatest consequence of all. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not just from Caleb, not just from Eva, but from the weight of everything they had put me through. I had walked through fire and come out on the other side, not burned, but refined, stronger, wiser, untouchable. My business, which had once been just a steady source of income, had flourished into something greater than I ever imagined. With my mind no longer preoccupied with betrayal and heartache, I poured my energy into expansion, into growth, into securing a future that belonged to no one but me. Every deal I closed, every milestone I reached, felt like a personal triumph, a reminder that I was more than what had happened to me. And as my life blossomed, theirs continued to wither. Caleb, from what I heard, had burned through every bridge he had left. No job, no home, no charm left to manipulate his way out. The man who once walked with arrogance now shuffled through life as a shadow of his former self. There was no coming back from this. Not for him. Eva, on the other hand, was facing a different kind of reality. Motherhood was no longer a dreamy fantasy with a man who had promised her the world. It was real, raw, and unforgiving. She was alone in a way she had never been before. And I knew, deep down, that she thought about me every single day, about what she had lost, about what could have been. But I had no space left for regret. Not hers, not mine. I traveled more. I met new people, rekindled friendships that had faded over the years. I laughed louder, slept peacefully, and woke up every day with purpose. My home, once a place filled with painful memories, became my sanctuary again. Every corner, every wall, every room was mine. Not tainted by deception, not haunted by betrayal. One evening, as I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine in hand, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A soft breeze kissed my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt it, the undeniable certainty that I had won. Not in the petty way Caleb had once measured victory. Not in money, not in power, not in proving anything to anyone. I had won because I had healed, because I had built something beautiful from the ashes they left behind, because I had reclaimed my life, and because at the end of it all, I had never needed them to be happy. I had only ever needed me.